This tense standoff outside the chief executive's office. In the last moments, the police here have donned shields. You see that they also have their batons, and they've moved up some police officers to the barriers here with gloves. The standoff continues here. This is the first working day today, Friday here, local time, as the sun comes up over Hong Kong, since after 2 days of holidays, presumably Hong Kong's chief executive would want to come to his office to work today, and I believe that's part of what the protests are doing, are trying to prevent CY Leung from even having access to his state offices. John.
The mood behind you seems to really be changing. In fact, the mood of the protesters seems to have changed a lot over the last few days. Over the weekend, even some protest leaders were urging protesters to go home because they were afraid of provoking authorities. They were really very concerned about their safety. Then when that threat passed, some of these demonstrations, some of the protesters looked a little bit bored sitting out there. Now they don't look bored. If anything, it would seem from what we can see with our camera, they seem emboldened. They seem ready to confront the police in a more direct way.
Well, I think it's important to note that this is not a monolithic movement. And while we're here, and there are several hundred students here, protesters, many of them with goggles and rain jackets and those improvised protective devices that people have been using here, there are far more demonstrators a couple of hundred meters from where I'm standing within that main encampment that you've seen many pictures of, which has a much more relaxed feel, which the police have not interfered with since the pre-dawn hours on Monday, some 5 days ago, where demonstrators have been kind of sleeping on the asphalt, erecting tents. There's been an explosion of art and idealism and all sorts of allusions to democracy and freedom, and it has just a real kind of almost, 1960s hippie vibe to it. Here you have a group of protesters who are much more confrontational. And so there have been sometimes contradictory messages coming out from different student leaders. I don't think there is one person that can tell this kind of grassroots youth movement where to go and what to do and how. And there is probably a spectrum of political views within the demonstrators as well, though the chief demand, which is repeated again and again and again, is democracy and no violence. And what's been remarkable is that this kind of amorphous student protest movement has really been disciplined about sticking to those two key ideas. John.
Let me ask you about the situation that you are in right now. I do not hear anybody with a loudspeaker. Does anyone have a bullhorn? Is there anyone on the demonstrator side, on the student side of this confrontation, who is clearly giving instructions to the rest? Or is it, once again, just an amorphous crowd making up its mind collectively?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, about a half hour ago, one of the female plainclothes officers from among the police came out and was apparently in talks or some kind of negotiations with one of the students up at the barricade. So there is dialogue between the security forces and the protesters. And we've seen communication throughout the course of the 5-day sit-in as well. It's not like the two sides do not communicate. Earlier, even in this program, we saw that one of the police commanders using a microphone, making announcements and urging the crowd to please open the way. And there have been students who seem to be kind of more vocal and leading chants here. But again, there doesn't appear to be one sole leader, and in fact there was one very emotional young man who was kind of weeping and sobbing at the barricades here to the police, and finally some of the students just pulled the kid back, like almost ripped him off the barricade because he was completely in hysterics, as opposed to the rest of the crowd here, which is quite calm right now.